Welcome my channel. A woman betrayed by a powerful family fights back with intelligence and courage. Exposing their corruption. A story of justice, resilience, and redemption. Stay tuned. Sophia Nguyen stood at the grand doorway of the Montgomery mansion, her fingers nervously clutching the delicate lace of her wedding dress. The opulence of the estate was overwhelming: polished marble floors, intricate chandeliers, and walls adorned with priceless art. Yet, none of it could dull the unease swirling in her chest. Today, she was supposed to marry Victor Montgomery, heir to the Montgomery fortune, the man she had spent the past 2 years building a life with. But in this room, with her soon-to-be father-in-law, Charles Montgomery, standing over her, the weight of the moment felt suffocating. Charles was every bit the embodiment of old money, a man whose sharp gaze seemed to pierce through her, measuring her worth against an invisible scale of privilege. He handed her the prenuptial agreement with a cold, almost patronizing smile. "Sign it, Miss Nguyen," he instructed, his voice smooth and commanding. "Unless you'd prefer to tell the 300 guests waiting downstairs that there won't be a wedding after all." Sophia's heart raced as she scanned the document, the words blurring in front of her. The contract was clear: if the marriage dissolved, she would walk away with nothing. No alimony, no claim to the Montgomery wealth, no rights to anything. It was as if the life she had fought so hard to build, the scholarships, the years of working late nights to get her job at a prestigious tech company, meant nothing. She wasn't even allowed to have a say in her future. Her background: working-class immigrant parents, a small accounting business, and an upbringing in the heart of Los Angeles, was, to Charles, a glaring mark of inferiority. He looked at her with disdain, his sneering expression a silent reminder that no matter her education or career, she would never belong in his world. She felt the weight of every judgment, every silent comparison to the life she could never fully inhabit. But her hands didn't shake. Despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her, she knew she had a role to play. And as much as Charles believed he held all the power, Sophia had a plan that would turn the tables. She wasn't just the poor girl marrying up, she was about to become the woman who would take down everything this family had built. With a deep breath, she signed the contract, the pen leaving a mark that would set the course for the years ahead. "Welcome to the family, Miss Nguyen," Charles said, his tone dripping with false warmth. Little did he know, Sophia had already begun to weave a web that would soon unravel the very empire he had spent decades building. Sophia Nguyen had always known that the world wasn't going to hand her anything. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Los Angeles, she was raised by parents who, despite their best efforts, could only afford the bare necessities. Her father ran a small accounting firm, serving the local community of immigrants who needed help navigating their finances. It wasn't glamorous work, but it instilled in Sophia a strong sense of discipline, responsibility, and the importance of hard work. Her mother, an elementary school teacher, often reminded her that success didn't come from money or status, it came from integrity and education. Sophia took those lessons to heart, excelling in school and earning scholarships that paved the way for her to attend the University of California, Berkeley. It was there that she discovered her passion for technology and finance. Two worlds that seemed impossibly far from her upbringing but also within her reach. She graduated with honors, landing a coveted position at a top tech firm in Silicon Valley. Yet, despite her professional success, Sophia could never shake the feeling that she was an outsider. At work, she was often the only woman in the room, and certainly the only one with a background like hers, foreign, working class, and driven by a desire to prove herself. When she met Victor Montgomery, it seemed like a fairy tale, someone who could offer her the life she had always dreamed of. But as she spent more time with him and his family, Sophia realized that wealth came with its own set of expectations and judgments. Charles Montgomery, Victor's father, was the embodiment of old money: distant, condescending, and quick to remind her that no matter what she achieved, she would never truly belong. Sophia had expected that, of course. But what surprised her was the way the Montgomery family treated her, not as an equal, but as a pawn in their larger game. The more she saw the corruption that ran through their business dealings, the more she became determined to fight back. She didn't just want to live comfortably, she wanted to expose the lies and deception that had allowed people like Charles Montgomery to rise to the top while trampling on everyone beneath them. Sophia's motivation wasn't born out of a desire for revenge, it was about justice. The more she learned about the Montgomery Group and its shady dealings, the more she felt compelled to act. Her background, once a source of shame in the face of the Montgomerys' wealth and power, now became her strength. She had nothing to lose but everything to gain. And as she sat at the dining table with Charles, the pressure mounting to sign the prenuptial agreement, her mind was already working on a plan, one that would dismantle the very empire he had spent decades building. She would take everything he held dear and turn it against him, proving that she was not the poor girl he thought she was, but the one who would bring his world crashing down. The tension in the room was thick as Charles Montgomery's gaze bore into Sophia. The prenuptial agreement lay on the table between them, the inked words of the contract seeming to pulse with an invisible weight. Charles sat across from her, his posture rigid, his hands meticulously folded in front of him as if he were some grand judge ready to pass judgment on her. "Sign it, Miss Nguyen," he commanded, his voice oozing with condescension. The words stung, but Sophia refused to show even a flicker of emotion. This was the moment where she could either accept his dominance or stand firm in her own resolve. She could feel the pressure mounting, the eyes of the entire Montgomery family seemingly on her, waiting for her to submit. Her fingers hovered over the pen, every part of her screaming to walk away. But she knew better than to let her emotions get the best of her. The agreement was a brutal reminder of her place in this world, one that made it clear she would walk away with nothing if the marriage ended. No alimony, no claim to the family fortune, no right to the Montgomery name. She would be nothing more than an outsider, as Charles had made so abundantly clear from the very start. His smirk deepened as he continued, outlining the terms with a detached precision, his words wrapping around her like chains. "In the event of a divorce, you leave with nothing, not a penny, not even a part of our company. You walk away with what you came with, nothing." The words were a slap to her face. But Sophia's resolve only hardened. She could feel her heart beating faster, the anger and humiliation threatening to spill over. But she fought it back. This wasn't the time for weakness. She couldn't afford to break down in front of him. Not now, not when she had come so far. She glanced at Victor, seated beside her but silent. His eyes lowered, a slight frown on his face. She could almost hear his voice in her head. His usual refrain, "Just sign it. Sophia, it's not that big of a deal." But it was a big deal. It was everything. The reminder that she would never truly be accepted, no matter how much she accomplished, no matter how hard she worked. It wasn't just a contract, it was a message. A message that no matter how much she succeeded in her own right, she would always be beneath them. Her gaze shifted back to the paper, and for a brief moment, she considered her options, but there was no turning back now. She had made her choice. Taking the pen, she signed the contract with deliberate steadiness, each stroke a small victory in a larger war. Charles's smile widened in triumph, and his words dripped with mockery. "Welcome to the family, Miss Nguyen," he said, before walking away, leaving her alone with the weight of her decision. As she sat there, the pen still in her hand, she knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Life as a Montgomery insider was everything Sophia had imagined, and nothing she expected. On the surface, everything was perfect. The mansion was a gleaming symbol of wealth, every corner filled with luxury and excess. Gala dinners, private events, and charity auctions were now part of her routine, and she played the role of the adoring fiancée and later wife with practiced ease. At these lavish affairs, Victor was often by her side, oblivious to the lies and manipulation happening under his nose. Meanwhile, Sophia kept her distance from the frivolous chatter of the guests, all of whom seemed to revolve around their own wealth and status, each one more desperate to outdo the other. As she glided through these social circles, a silent part of her remained detached, focused solely on her true mission. The real work was happening behind closed doors, through her access to Montgomery Industries, the company Charles had built with a web of illegal transactions, insider trading, and shady investments. Sophia, with her finance background and sharp instincts, had slowly begun piecing together the puzzle of corruption within the company. She spent long hours at work, poring over financial documents, using her position to dig deeper into the company's operations. She knew the risks. If anyone suspected her, it would be over before it even began. But every time she uncovered another illegal deal or forged financial record, the fire in her grew stronger. Charles Montgomery had built his empire on the suffering of others, and Sophia was going to bring it all down. Despite the tension, she managed to keep her composure in front of Victor. He was unaware of the long nights she spent away from him, the hours spent consulting with Lily, her childhood friend who now worked with the Sex Financial Crimes Division. Lily was her only ally, and together, they carefully devised their plan. Every conversation, every document Sophia gathered, was passed off in the safest possible way, ensuring there was no trace that could lead back to her. It wasn't just about taking down Charles Montgomery, it was about holding him accountable for everything he had done to the people who had worked tirelessly for his empire. The employees who had lost their pensions, the investors whose money had vanished into the abyss of his shell companies. But being married to Victor, still so blind to the reality of his family's actions, was a challenge Sophia had not anticipated. She had always known the Montgomerys were a family built on pretensions of superiority. But it hurt to see Victor so caught up in his lavish, sheltered life, playing the part of the perfect heir with no real understanding of how deeply his father's influence stretched. When Sophia was introduced at events, Charles would proudly announce, "Sophia works in finance," as if it were a quaint hobby rather than the career she had worked tirelessly for. He was quick to make her seem insignificant, always subtly reminding her of her lower social standing, as if to reinforce that she was lucky to be in their world at all. But Sophia had a different perspective. Every time Charles belittled her, every time Victor remained silent in the face of his father's dismissive attitude, Sophia's resolve strengthened. Her quiet determination grew as she learned more about Montgomery Industries' dark dealings. It wasn't just about her own rise in the business world, it was about the systemic rot that needed to be exposed. She would be the one to do it. The woman they underestimated would bring their empire crashing down. She would keep playing her part, attending every event, wearing the designer dresses and flashing the practiced smiles, all the while working in the shadows. After all, she wasn't just a Montgomery insider, she was the one who was going to destroy it from within. It was late one night, long after the last emails had been sent, that Sophia's discovery came to light. She had been working through the financial records of Montgomery Industries again, trying to make sense of some irregularities in their international transactions. The more she dug, the more the numbers seemed to tell a different story, one of deceit and fraudulent activity carefully concealed beneath a facade of success. It started with an obscure shell company based in the Cayman Islands, which had been receiving large sums of money from Montgomery Industries under vague descriptions. As she pulled on this thread, everything else began to unravel. There were hidden accounts, mysterious wire transfers, and multiple offshore companies that had been used to siphon billions in funds. The scale of the fraud was staggering: misreported earnings, doctored financial statements, and kickbacks to political figures. The deeper she went, the more complex the operation became. But one thing was clear: Charles Montgomery had built his entire empire on illegal dealings. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just corporate greed, it was a systematic web of financial crimes, all orchestrated by the very man who had humiliated her, belittled her, and treated her like an outsider in his world. Sophia knew that she had to act fast. She didn't have the luxury of time. If Charles or anyone in his network discovered what she had uncovered, her life, and the evidence, would be at risk. That same night, she called Lily, her childhood friend and the head of the Sex Financial Fraud Division. As the phone rang, Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't afford any missteps now. When Lily finally picked up, Sophia's voice was low but urgent. "I've got it. The full picture. Everything. The shell companies, the missing funds, the bribes. It's all here." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "You're sure?" Lily's voice was laced with both concern and excitement. Sophia nodded, even though Lily couldn't see her. "I've traced it all. It's bigger than I thought." Charles Montgomery's empire is built on lies. And I've got the evidence to prove it. She explained everything she had uncovered. Each fraudulent deal, every illegal transfer, every kickback. But even as she spoke, a cold sense of dread lingered in her chest. This was the moment when everything would change. If they didn't act fast, the entire operation could collapse in on itself. Sophia wasn't just gathering evidence now, she was preparing to bring down a dynasty. And in the process, she would expose the man who had made her life hell for so long. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore, she was fighting for her future. For the truth that had been buried beneath the opulence and power of the Montgomery family. It was time to make her move. Sophia's carefully constructed world began to crack the moment she saw Charles Montgomery's eyes narrow in suspicion. It was subtle at first, just a comment here and there about her late nights or an innocent question about the meetings she attended. But it was enough to make her pulse quicken with a fear she had kept at bay for so long. The tipping point came during a private dinner at the Montgomery estate. A week after she had sent her last batch of evidence to Lily at the SEC. As the evening wore on, Charles's comments grew sharper, his gaze more penetrating, as if he could see through the mask she had been wearing for years. Victor, ever the oblivious one, was preoccupied with his phone, likely texting one of his many friends or mistresses. But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that Charles was closing in. When the conversation turned to the company's recent international expansion, Charles casually remarked, "You know, Sophia, I've been hearing whispers. Some of our partners have been asking questions about you." Her stomach sank. She had worked hard to keep her investigations secret. But she was starting to realize that she might have underestimated the depth of Charles's paranoia. He was a master manipulator. And it wouldn't take much for him to start piecing together the truth. "What kind of questions?" Sophia managed to ask, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. "Oh, just some concerns about your involvement with the business," Charles said, his smile almost predatory. "Seems a little too convenient, don't you think? A woman with your background, suddenly landing in a family like ours, working with some of the top financial minds in the world?" His words stung, but she had no time to dwell on them. Her mind raced as she realized that Charles was onto her. The walls were closing in. If she didn't act now, everything she had worked for, the evidence, the plan, the years of preparation, would be in jeopardy. She had to make a choice, confront Charles and risk everything or stay quiet and wait for the right moment. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wouldn't let him dictate the terms of her life. But just as she was about to speak, Victor chimed in, oblivious to the tension between them. "Dad, it's just a formality. You know how corporate stuff is. Let Sophia do her thing." Charles shot his son a pointed look, then turned back to Sophia with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course," he said coldly. "Just make sure you're not embarrassing us, dear." The rest of the evening passed in a haze for Sophia. The fragile facade she had maintained was slipping, and she could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. That night, as she lay beside Victor, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath, Sophia realized that she could no longer play the dutiful wife. The time for waiting was over. She had been playing the long game for years, but the stakes were now higher than ever. Tomorrow, she would make her move. It was no longer just about exposing the truth, it was about survival. The morning of the arrest, Sophia stood at the window of her office, watching the world outside carry on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She had done it, after years of gathering evidence, after carefully laying the groundwork. It was finally time. She had done everything she could to bring Charles Montgomery to justice. And now the FBI was moving in. As she reviewed the final details with Lily, her heart pounded in her chest. The phone rang, and her pulse quickened as she picked it up. "It's happening." Lily's voice crackled on the other end. "The arrest warrant is out. Montgomery's on his way down." Sophia felt a rush of adrenaline. She had known this day would come. But now that it was here, it felt surreal. The Montgomery empire, built on lies and deception, was finally crumbling. As she prepared to leave her office, her phone lit up with a message from Victor. "Meet me at the office. We need to talk." She hesitated for only a moment before her phone buzzed again, this time. It was from her lawyer, confirming that the divorce papers had been filed. In one fell swoop, everything was coming undone for the Bennets. She made her way to the Montgomery building, her every step heavy with purpose. As she entered the lobby, the scene was chaos. The media was already camped outside, the cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Inside, executives were scrambling, trying to shield themselves from the inevitable fallout. But as Sophia walked past the hushed crowd, one figure stood apart from the rest: Charles Montgomery. His face was ashen, his usual composure cracked for the first time. He had heard the news. As she approached, she saw him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice frantic. "I don't care what it takes," he was shouting. "Find out who leaked this to the SEC and shut them down." But as he turned around, his eyes locking on Sophia's, his voice faltered. "You," he breathed. "It was you, wasn't it?" There was no fear in Sophia's expression, only a calm resolve. She had spent years walking the tightrope, but now it was her turn to make the final move. She sat down in one of the plush leather chairs, crossing her legs as if she were on an ordinary business call. "Did you really think I was just the naive girl you could bully into submission?" she asked. Her voice steady. "That I would sign your contract and spend the rest of my life grateful for whatever scraps of respect you deemed to throw my way?" Charles took a step toward her, his face twisting with rage. "You little snake," he spat. "After everything I've done for you, everything I've given you, this is how you repay me?" She laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "You gave me nothing but humiliation and contempt for 10 years. But I gave you something in return, enough rope to hang yourself." Sophia pulled out her phone, unlocking the screen and bringing up the recording app. "Would you like to hear some of our conversations? Like the one from last month's board meeting where you explicitly outlined how to hide the missing pension funds? Or perhaps the call you made to your friends in the Cayman Islands about your offshore accounts?" Charles's face drained of color as he stepped back. "Those recordings are illegal," he yelled. But Sophia remained unflinching. "Actually, they're not. New York is a one-party consent state. And I consented." As she stood, her voice was final. "This is just the beginning. I have everything. Every fraudulent transaction, every cooked book, every bribe, and every kickback. You're finished, Charles." Just as the last words left her mouth, the door to the office burst open. The FBI agents filed in, their badges gleaming. "Richard Montgomery, you're under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy," one agent announced. Charles took one last look at Sophia, his arrogance finally shattered. As the agents cuffed him and began to lead him away, he turned to Victor, who had just entered the room, eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad, what's going on?" Victor cried, but it was too late. "Your wife," Charles spat. "She's the one who turned us in. She's been working with the SEC the entire time." Victor's gaze shifted to Sophia, confusion and betrayal in his eyes. But she didn't flinch. She didn't need his approval anymore. As the agents escorted Charles from the building, Victor tried to follow, but another agent stopped him. "Mr. Montgomery, we have some questions for you too." Sophia stood motionless, watching her father-in-law's empire come crashing down. She had finally won. In the weeks following the dramatic arrest of Charles Montgomery, the aftermath of his empire's collapse was felt across every corner of the business world. Montgomery Industries, once a titan of the corporate landscape, was now in ruins, its fraudulent dealings laid bare for all to see. Sophia felt a quiet sense of victory, but it wasn't one she could celebrate openly. The media buzzed with headlines about the scandal, and Sophia's role in bringing it all down was highlighted in interviews and reports. Yet, she remained focused on what mattered most: the victims. She had worked tirelessly to ensure that the billions stolen from employees, investors, and pensioners would be returned. Through a restitution fund, the assets seized from Montgomery's offshore accounts were redirected to those who had suffered most from his greed. While the media focused on the fall of a powerful family, Sophia worked behind the scenes, ensuring that the right thing was done. It was her mission to make sure that the justice people had been denied for so long was finally served. As the dust settled, Sophia reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her humble beginnings in Los Angeles, her years of hard work and sacrifice, and the deep desire to make a difference in a world that often favored the powerful and privileged. But what she had learned over the past decade was that integrity had power. Patience, too, was an incredibly powerful tool. It wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about ensuring that truth had the time and space to be heard. Even if it took years. Standing in front of the mirror one evening, she smiled at the reflection staring back at her. The woman who had once been a naive girl trying to fit into a world that didn't want her had become someone unrecognizable. She was no longer an outsider. She was a force to be reckoned with. Despite the public admiration for her efforts, there was no great celebration for Sophia. Her victory wasn't about the accolades, it was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had dismantled a corrupt empire. It was about proving to herself, and to everyone else, that a woman from Queens, armed with nothing but integrity and a sense of justice, could change the world. Her phone buzzed, bringing her back to the present moment. It was a message from Lily. The Bennetts may have lost, but you've won, Sophia. They'll never be able to hurt anyone again. Sophia took a deep breath and sent a quick reply. We've all won. And in that quiet moment, as she looked at the city lights stretching out before her, she knew her journey wasn't over. This chapter had ended, but her mission was far from complete. There were still so many more corrupt empires to expose, and she was just getting started. The lesson from this story is that integrity and resilience can turn adversity into strength. Sophia's journey shows that even in the face of manipulation, prejudice, and betrayal, staying true to one's values and patiently working towards justice can lead to powerful change. It's not about seeking revenge, but about standing up for what is right and using intelligence and strategy to bring down corruption. The story emphasizes that no matter your background or circumstances, you can overcome obstacles and make a significant impact when driven by purpose and a commitment to justice.